All right, Jabbo, say good morning. Let us begin. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem on in Os Nun Gimel. We started this yesterday. Section 53 in Reb Tzaddik, where Reb Tzaddik introduced us to this idea that often throughout the Gemara uses the phrase Margala Bepume, literally a beautiful jewel or a beautiful idea, expression. And often what the Gemara will do is go ahead and cite an expression or cite a form of speech, a regular expression, a mundane expression by someone. It doesn't even have to be someone of incredible reputation, and yet the Gemara will derive some significant and meaningful life lesson from this statement. So Reb Tzaddik on this Torah, Reb Tzaddik is intrigued by this dynamic. Now, he actually brought down a number of examples of this, or he quoted the Gemara in Maseches Sanhedrin Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, that the Gemara uses the Lashon Harbe Dahahu Dahava Ka'amar Va'azil. There was a person or people used to say the following statements, and the Gemara went on to quote a number of different statements that were said by individuals, and then something very interesting happened, which is after the Gemara recorded the statement, then the Gemara would quote a pasuk in order to back up that statement. So I'll just show you one example of this, which is fascinating. If you look in the Makoros V'Tziyunim, if you look on the footnotes on the bottom, so you'll notice in the left-hand column, it's footnote Kuf Yud Beis. But in the left-hand column, which is still the continuation of Kuf Yud Beis, about 2, 4, 6, 7 lines in. So he quotes over here the following. He quotes from this Gemara Maseches Sanhedrin, and the Gemara says like this: Hahu dekava ka'amar va'azil. There was a certain individual who used to say. Now the individual they're quoting is just a regular guy who used to say as follows: Kirachamisiv hava aziza. So he writes, when the love between myself and my wife was intense and passionate, afuse disafsira shachivan. So let's listen to this. He said, we could have slept together on the edge of a sword. Meaning that when the love was passionate between myself and my wife, we didn't need any distance between us, right? We could simultaneously together occupy the same space. The edge of the sword, obviously, again, is a very narrow space. He says, Hashta delo aziza, but now the Hashta delo aziza rachamisin. Now he says, now that the passion is not as intense, the love is not as intense. Purya barshisin garmidi lo sagilan. See, he says literally again, even a very large bed is not enough for us. So there was a man who used to say this. Then the Gemara goes on. Rav Huna kraik sivi. Rav Huna said the truth is this is a pasuk. What's the pasuk? Meikarik sev v'no arati l'chasham v'dibarti etchami ala kapores. Ultimately, again, when the Mishkan is first created, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I will speak to you from on top of the lid of the Aron. And we know, again, the lid of the Aron itself, there was only 10 tefachim high. V'danya, Aron v'tisha v'kapores tevach harei kan asara. Right, so the height of the lid of the Aron was 10 tefachim off the ground. Government akarka harei shakadosh baruch hu mashre shchinaso basar tefachim samoch lekarka. So we see over here from the Mishkan that the Rebbeinu Shalom would go ahead and rest his shchina within 10 tefachim of the ground. But yet then, interestingly enough, uksiv v'habayis asher bana hamelech shlomo laHashem shishim ama arko ve'esim rachbo ushloshim ama kamaso ulebasov ksiv ko amar Hashem hashamayim kisi. Well, so this is actually very interesting. So Rav Huna said there's an interesting dynamic that happened in the relationship between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael, which is in the beginning, Hashem said, I'll speak to you from on top of the Kapores, which means I'll be within 10 tefachim of the earth. Then what happens? Shlomo HaMelech builds a much larger structure than that. And then what happens? The Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, and the pasuk says, Hashamayim kisi, the heavens is where I reside. So you see the progression? In the beginning, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is right here with us on the top of the Aron. Then things change a little bit. There's a much bigger structure to house the Shekhinah. Then things change a bit more, and the Shekhinah retreats ultimately into the Shamayim. So Rav Huna understood from this guy who was just making a statement about life, that when we were young and our love was passionate and intense, we could sleep together on the edge of the sword. Now that we're a little bit older, so even a very large bed is not large enough to accommodate us. There's a similar dynamic through the Shekhinah. Relationships change, and sometimes what begins as exceptionally passionate and close proximity to one another, distance occurs. So we'll say, here's just an example of what Reb Tzaddik is referring to. See, here you have an individual who just says a statement. He's not quoting a pasuk, he's not quoting a brisa, he's not quoting. All he's quoting is a dynamic in life, just the way kind of relationships go. And Rav Huna says, wow, because that simple statement of a Jew, to a certain degree, captures the essence of the relationship between the Shekhinah and the Ribono Shel Olam. So back up top to Reb Tzaddik. So I'll say, just, you can look in the footnote, by the way, footnote Kuf Yod Beis is a whole bunch of examples from this Gemara, really wonderful examples, fascinating. So Reb Tzaddik goes on, he says, so what's the pshat? What's the pshat? So we'll see, if you take a look, we're in Osnun Gimel, on page Kuf Chav Zayin, the left-hand paragraph, in the Be'orei HaChasidus. So the Rebbe says, what do we learn from here? He says, Ki kol nefesh mi Yisrael, afilu ha'adam ha'amoni va'poshet biyoser, yesh lo b'shoresh nafsho elokis, achiza b'divrei Torah miyuchades. So we'll say, this is so incredibly beautiful. Reb Tzaddik says, what we learn from here is that every Jew, even the simplest Jew, the essence of his soul is rooted in Torah. In other words, I will say, the notion that regular people, says Reb Tzaddik, are espousing wisdom, and then that wisdom, the great Rabbanim, the great Chazal, go ahead and say, oh, by the way, that statement, that's a pasuk, that's a dynamic, that's a brisa, tells you that even the simplest Jew is rooted in Torah. He doesn't realize he's speaking Torah. He doesn't realize that he's quoting Torah wisdom. But what he says is Torah, which I will say, again, I just want to point out, what Reb Tzaddik over here is doing, this is a progression from what we said before. Remember again, Reb Tzaddik said in Osnun days, why is instantaneous change possible? Why is instantaneous change possible? Right? Why is there the ability for a person, even who has made catastrophic life mistakes, to turn himself around? Remember what Reb Tzaddik said? Because the nefesh hapanimis, the inner nefesh, which is, according to, like the Baal Tanya says, the spark, the nitzos elokim ma'al mamish, Baruch Hu, is untainted. There's a piece of us that is the Ribono Shel Olam. There's a piece of me that literally is a derivative from God. That's why, again, no matter how badly I mess up in life, change is always possible, because that one piece is never tainted. Reb Tzaddik says, by the way, even the simplest Jew talks Torah. Maybe he never learned Torah, or maybe if he learned Torah, he didn't pay attention to Torah, or maybe he just never. So how is? So Tzaddik says that's because, again, the nafsho yeshlo b'shorish nafsho kis achiza b'divrei Torah miyuchades. The nefesh, the soul of the Jew, has an achiza, has a hold, is rooted in Torah. We'll say, what an incredibly powerful yisod. That's why the Gemara is filled with examples. Margula bepume. Oh, the havaragil inish, the amri inish. Right? People say, who cares what people say? Because it's important to hear what a Jew says. Because at the end of the day, a Jew's soul is rooted in Torah. And therefore, this Torah that comes out of his mouth, even if he doesn't realize that he's quoting Torah, it's so profound. Kanoda, turn the page. Kanoda umuvan memela, shedvar Torah hatamun bedibur, upiskam shemargala bepume, shuragila umra befiv, vushagar al-shono. Sod devar Torah zeh, zehu shoresh nafsho be'elokim chayim. So we'll say, so this is really an incredibly beautiful yisod. So says Reb Tzaddik, this is why even Chazal refer to this as margula bepume, right? Margula bepume means a jewel, right? A precious gem in a person's mouth. Again, the phrase of the Amri Inchi, people say, I understand that. We're quoting what people say. It's good to know what people say. But this idea of margala bepume, we'll say the jewel in the mouth, that the Jew has an achiza, has a hold in Torah. And we'll say, by the way, you see this all the time. There's sometimes a problem. So let's focus a little more. So Tzaddik says this yisod, that the Jew has an achiza, has a hold in Torah, is reflective of the innate holiness of the Jew. The Jew has the ability to speak words of wisdom that are reflective of the Ribbon Shel Olam's wisdom without him even realizing what it is that he is saying. There's an achiza, there's a hold, there's a root. He goes on, Hatzaddik says, Ubeir davar zeh, he could koach hadibar, I'll say page kuf chav ches, right hand column. We'll just do another line, then we'll have to stop for today. He says, Ubeir davar zehu, ki koach hadibar sheba adam, hu yisod hanefesh v'achiyus shalo. So the Tzaddik says that the koach hadibor, right, the power of speech that is within a person, is the yisod hanefesh, is the essence of his soul and the essence of his chiyus. And I both say we know this concept because remember again, the Torah itself, when it speaks about the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created man, so what does the Torah say? Vayipach ba'apav ruach chayim. So the Torah says HaKadosh Baruch Hu blew life into the nose, into the nostrils of man. And remember again, Onkelos, in his commentary on Ruach Chaim, says, Ruach Memalala, speech. That speech is the greatest manifestation of the ruchnius of man. In fact, again, meaning this idea that speech, quite cohesive speech, comprehensive speech, is ultimately what differentiates man from the rest of the Bria. That's reflective of man's neshama. That's reflective of man's soul. Man's soul, a spark of the Ribbon Shalom. So therefore it makes sense, well, I mean, we'll stop here, I'll pick up with this piece tomorrow, but therefore because it makes sense that man's innate Kiddusha is expressed through his speech. That's why the Margala Bepume, sometimes a person will say something, not even realizing that what it is that they're saying is words of Torah, but it's almost as if the Dibor has the ability to express the most innate Kiddush of man. All right, but we'll stop over here. We'll pick up with this idea tomorrow. Of course, conversely, what's fascinating is that one of man's greatest abilities to debase himself is through speech as well, which makes sense. Because remember, again, wherever there is the greatest capacity for holiness, there is also the greatest capacity for tumah or for debasement. So if dibur is going to be the way that I can articulate and I can express my most innate kiddusha, it's also the way that, unfortunately, again, I could express my most innate tumah as well. All right, well, we'll pick up Emiras Hashem with this piece tomorrow. Shkach,